Andriy Shevchenko, and on behalf of Mediacentru Ukraine, I would like to welcome all the journalists who cover our fight for freedom. And our next guest is Giorgi Gogia, Associate Director at Human Rights Watch. And this organization has produced a report on the apparent crimes against human rights committed in Ukraine. Mr. Gogia, what are the key takeaways from this report?
This report looks at conditions under Russian occupation in Chernihiv and Kyiv regions. So days after Russians left this area, we went into over 17 villages, interviewed over 65 people. We looked at physical evidence on the ground, analyzed videos and photos shared with us, and also looked at satellite images to document and expose the potential war crimes, horrific abuses that have been committed against civilians by Russian forces in the territories under their occupation in Kyiv and Chernihiv regions in the northeastern Ukraine. Some of the findings include summary executions when people have been shot without any legal cause for it. We documented at least 32 cases of this, 22 new cases of summary executions. We also documented 9 cases of other unlawful killings. There were also 6 cases of enforced disappearances when people last have been seen in Russian custodies and then have disappeared, and there's no information about their whereabouts. And also documented 7 cases of torture or mock executions, and spoke with dozens and dozens of people who have been arbitrarily detained in inhuman, degrading conditions by Russian forces. These are not just numbers. These are real people with real fates, real lives that have been taken away, and the lives that have been ruined. And it's really important that these people get justice, the justice they deserve and they need.
What time period are we talking about? Is it end of February till end of March, or any other specifics?
I did not hear the full question. The sound came late, but if I understood, you're asking when the research was done, or
what period does it cover?
Okay, so it covers from late February, like pretty much when the invasion started, to the end of March, when Russian forces left the territory.
Is it mainly focused on the suburbs of Kyiv? Are we talking about the Bucha, Borodyanka area and the Chernihiv direction?
Yes, so as I said, we went to Kyiv regions. I mean, Human Rights Watch has been reporting about abuses and horrific abuses committed there from day one, but covered remotely and also visited Bucha and other areas and have separately reported on them. This particular research focused on much wider area in Kyiv region, as well as Chernihiv Oblast region. 17 villages in starting from, I don't know, Postomel to Motizhin to Yahidne, to we went up to the north, almost to the border of with Belarus.
Let's talk about the legal side of this terrible story. The crimes that you have found, do they fall under the definition of war crimes?
They certainly appear to be war crimes. I mean, that's why the further investigation is needed. They also appear to be crimes against humanity. So it's really, really important for the investigation to take place. And it is international humanitarian law prohibits attacks against civilians. What we have found are in cases, direct targeting of civilians, detaining them under kind of inhuman, degrading treatment of them, torture. These are all prohibited and grave violations of international humanitarian law, which amounts to war crimes. That's the conclusion that Human Rights Watch is making.
We are talking not just about individual cases, but the numbers are very tragically impressive. What does it tell you? Is it a demonstration of some criminal negligence by the Russian officers, by the High Command, or do you see any signs that this type of behavior was tolerated or maybe encouraged by the leadership of the Russian armed forces?
Well, it's hard for me to know how far. I mean, how far it was actually if there was any attempt to prevent them from happening. Like these are not. This is clearly the responsibility goes beyond individual soldier responsibility. There's a clear need for command responsibility to be established because either they knew or they had to know what was happening, and therefore there's a criminal negligence or criminal responsibility for the war crimes within the command responsibility of the forces as well.
Your organization runs global operations. How would you compare this war, this conflict, to what you see in other parts of the world?
It's we try not to compare because usually the standards, international humanitarian standards, Geneva Conventions are there for all. What is unusual slightly in Ukraine case is that there is the war crime documentation happens almost instantaneously. There are investigators, national investigators as well, international from the International Criminal Court. So there are evidence secured right after the possible crimes are taking place. So hopefully this is a good sign for the accountability purposes. I mean, the people whose lives have been taken, the people whose lives have been affected in such a way, they share their stories for the purpose of being heard, but for the purpose of justice as well. So it's really important that what is unusual of this in this conflict is that there are a lot of documentation happening on the ground. There are national authorities investigating. There are international investigators on the ground. Hopefully, this all means that accountability, while not be very swift, it is forthcoming, and everything needs to be done for that to be the case.
What are you going to do with this report? How does it usually work?
Well, first of all, this is not the end of the work, right? This is just this is the ongoing documentation Human Rights Watch is doing in every conflict, including in this particular. There are teams of Human Rights Watch researchers still on the ground who do the documentation on a daily basis to amass the body of work, the body of documentation of violations of international humanitarian law. And violation of Geneva Convention that are happening. The idea is to publicize them, hopefully with the goal that there needs to be time when there's a shift in the way in the behavior of Russian soldiers on the ground. As like this is documentation of what happened in the north, but the war is still ongoing. So it's really important for the publicity of these crimes, for the accountability for these crimes, so that there's a shift in the behavior, in the way the war is fought in the south, in other areas in Ukraine.
Do you follow, or does the organization follow the situation in the other occupied territories, specifically in the south, where the Russians have been trying to establish their own administration, and in some areas in the east?
Absolutely, we do. I mean, as I said, there are teams of Human Rights Watch researchers currently on the ground. They're still collecting the evidence. They're still working on several documents, and the Human Rights Watch will be making them public as we gather enough evidence for the conclusive reports.
What is your first impression of what we see, let's say, in the south of Ukraine?
I would refrain from making comments at this stage because, like, simply it's still ongoing. We're first of all traveling as far as we can, but also talking to people displaced from the conflict zone. So analyzing the satellite images as well as looking at other evidences available to understand how the war is fought and what kind of international humanitarian law violations are taking place. Again, as I said, because we have not yet publicized them findings, but I know there's several of them in makings. I would refrain from kind of making them public now.
Giorgi Gogia, Associate Director at Human Rights Watch. Thank you for this conversation, and thank you for what you and your team have accomplished following and investigating crimes in Ukraine under the Russian occupation.
Thank you for having me.
This completes our briefing, and our next event will be at 1 p.m. We're going to talk to Natalia Halibarenko, head of the Ukrainian mission to NATO.